أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على خير المرسلين محمد النبي أمي وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
Inshallah, I'd like to thank all of you for joining us again, for inviting to the straight path, do a Tafseer, do a Kumay session. And tonight we're going to finish up the stanza in the Dua Kumay that says, Allahumma kfirli yat dhanub allati tunzilu nikam. You would think after saying this thing for 3 weeks in a row, it would roll off the tongue pretty easy. But inshallah, this has been very, very, very in-depth. And we've been discussing those sins that bring down adversities. And we said that there were 9 sins. And those 9 sins are, number 1, rebellion. Number 2, violating people's rights. Number 3, mocking Allah's servants. Number 4, breaking promises. Number 5, evident wrongdoing. We did all the way up into evident wrongdoing on last week. Now we're going to deal with scattering lies, judgment in contrast to Allah's rules, and not paying zakat. And the last is shortening the measure. And we talked about the shortening the measure before. Now, when we think about when things are going bad in our lives, and we have all of these difficulties come about, we always wonder, what did I do to make these things happen? And we've already discussed 5 of the 9, and maybe one of the most important ones that we're going to talk about as far as the sins that bring down adversity would be the scattering of lies. And all of the Ahlul Bayt have all considered the scattering of lies as a major sin. And you know, we actually talked about this one. We talked about how the people that would be the most populated amount of people in the hellfire would be those people who are the liars. And lying actually opens up the Pandora's box. When I was a child, my mother would say to me, she said, son, if you lie, you'll cheat. If you cheat, you'll steal. If you steal, you'll kill. But all of this opened up with what?
Lying.
With lying. Absolutely. And one of the things that you can really tell about a liar is that if you want to know if a person is a hypocrite or not, by the definition of what a hypocrite is a person that says he does something but does the exact opposite, which constitutes as a lie. Imam Jafar as-Sadiq alayhi salatu wasalam, he lets us know in one of the hadith that for those that will be a liar, and he is taking this hadith from his father, from his father, all the way back to Imam Ali alayhi salatu wasalam, who said that you would know the liar in the hereafter on the day of judgment because he would have such a stench on him. He would stink so bad that you automatically know what his sin is. Better than that, when you look into the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, so invoke the curse of Allah upon those who lie. And he also says in the glorious Quran, surely Allah guides not him who is a liar, unthankful. When we look at those people, why is it that we don't look at the liars in a good way? Because a liar can't be trusted. How can you trust a liar? Even if he's coming to tell you something good, you have to verify the information. And because you have to verify that information, it becomes tiresome. It becomes cumbersome. Imam Ali alayhi salatu wasalam, he told us about the liar. He says, and do not associate yourselves with liars. Why? Because if you associate yourselves with liars, then you too will be a liar yourself. Even if you don't lie, the people will associate you as a liar because what do they say? that association brings forth assimilation. Birds of the feather flock together. So because you accompany these people who are not good people, then you too will be looked at as a liar. The Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he says, do you want me to inform you of the biggest major sin? Polytheism, unkindness towards parents, and he sat upright and continued and said, and beware the untrue speech. These are things that we went over last week, and the reason why I'm going over them again is because, again, lying opens up the Pandora's box. And when you find yourself around liars and doing things contrary to what Islam is asking us to do, then you fall into, that's right, and you have all types of adversities to fall on you. And this thing with lying, the reason why I'm going over it again is because some people say, oh, it's okay for you to do a little white lie. In Islam, do we believe in little white lies? No. You're either telling the truth or you're lying. There isn't two ways about it. It's one way or the other. So the next thing that we will go into is judging in contrast to Allah's rules. Now, from the sound of that, what do you think it means? Yes.
Thinking different about what Allah asked you to do.
Absolutely. Have anything? No? Okay. Well, I'll give you a definition that we have here. It says, if a judge is aware of Allah's rule but denies it in judgment and issues verdict based on irreligious rules, he is, in the speech of the Holy Quran, a transgressor, an oppressor, and a disbeliever. He is a disbeliever because he has denied Allah's rule. Remember, we talked about Allah's rulership and his names. He is an oppressor since he has deprived a human being of his rights. To deprive a human being of his rights means that you are not what?
Giving him what he has to have.
Absolutely. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Furu'ud Deen, in the Usuli Deen, what is it? What is the only attribute of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that is in the Usuli Deen? The only one of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's attributes that's in the Usuli Deen is that he is just. So if you're a judge, especially in the Islamic way of life, and for Muslims, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given Islam for who? Only Muslims or for mankind?
Mankind.
Mankind. What a beautiful religion that we have, because while the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was ruling the Islamic Ummah, if the Jew had committed a sin, how was the Jew to be judged?
According to his religion.
According to his book, according to his religion. If the Christian did something while under Muslim rule, how would he be judged?
By his religion.
As far as his religion is concerned. So if this is an Islamic society, or if we were trying to build an Islamic society here, then anybody that would want to be a judge would need to know what?
The concepts of all the religions.
The concepts of all the religions. This is why the Aima, this is why the Imams of the Ahlul Bayt were so great, because they were able to deliver the rulings of all the people through their books. That means that they would not give an unfair verdict, because if they did that, then they would be doing what? Going in contrast to Allah's rules. Imam Jafar Sadiq alayhi salatu wasalam, he says, one who issues an unfair verdict, even on 2 drachmas, has become a blasphemer. How deep is that? If you're talking about something insignificant. He says that if you give an unfair ruling, if you give a wrong ruling, if you give an unfair verdict, then you're considered a blasphemer. Why?
Because you're not saying the real thing that you're supposed to give. You're changing the law of Allah.
You're changing the law of Allah. And most of the times when you're changing the law of Allah, what are you actually doing?
Going against His law.
You're going against it, and it shows that you are a weak individual. This is why Imam Ali alayhi salatu wasalam, in his letter that he sent to Malik al-Ashtar, he says, "Oh Malik, when you choose people to be judges, make sure that these people, that you pay these people handsomely, so that they would not succumb to bribery. Because if someone could come to you and say, let me give you so much money, and you go against the laws of Allah, that means that you've done what? You've traded in the life of the hereafter for this world. So we're talking about judges, but as Muslims, how do we judge? We judge based on what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us to judge. Especially those of us who live in the West. This becomes somewhat difficult for us because we have a culture, and many things in our culture don't necessarily jive with what it is that we know in Islam. But if we truly understand Islam, then there's certain aspects of our deen, if we learn them properly, we'll see that there's a harmony between our culture and Islam. Besides, Islam is supposed to be the great sifter. What do you do when you sift things?
You take the thing you need and all
the bad, it
goes
goes to the bottom. So Islam, we put our culture into Islam, we sift it, and those things that are good in our culture,
stay up.
we keep them. Those things that are bad,
Away.
we throw them away. So in this, we're supposed to only judge by what we know is the truth in Islam, because this way we don't go against the rulings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Not paying zakah. Now we know that we discussed this earlier, and here when it's referring to zakah, we're talking about the zakah is the purifier for the rich, because it is their duty to take care of those who are less fortunate. So we have to pay alms. And my teacher, Maulana Fawzi, he gave a beautiful story about zakah. And I'm going to relate the story to you, and I'm going to put it in really quickly. But he told us about a man who lived next to the Prophet's masjid in Medina during the time of the Prophet. And this man, he would come to Jummah every Friday to pray with the believers. And when he would get to Jummah, after the Jummah prayer was completed, he would go to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and beg the Prophet, "O Prophet of Allah, please beg Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and ask him to give me sheep, more sheep, so that I can have a lot of sheep, so I can be a rich man, because I'm very poor." The Prophet said, "Do you really want me to pray for that?" The man said, "Yes." So the Prophet said, "Well, come back and ask me again." So the guy comes back again and he asks. And this time the Prophet, he prays for him, and the man gets his sheep. So while the man has his sheep, he has 2 sheep, his 2 sheep become 4 sheep, and he's still coming to Jummah. But the more sheep he has, the more he misses Salatul Jummah. It gets to a point to where he has so many sheep now, where he has to move away from the masjid and move somewhere where he can actually graze his sheep. Now many of us, we want Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to increase us in what? In our wealth. And this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did for this man. But when it was time for the man to pay zakah on his sheep, to thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because it's Allah who had given him the sheep and increased the sheep, the man told Rasulullah, "You pay the zakat, I'm not paying anything." So, but if he paid this money, it would do what? It would protect his wealth. He would be following the laws of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. By doing this, but him not paying the zakat, what did he do? He went against the rulings, the laws of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That was a great sin. He didn't pay the zakat. That was another great sin. And it's really simple how it is. that we understand how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blesses us. We have a saying from Bibi Fatima to Zahra, salawatu salamu alayha, when she said, Allah obliged belief for you to purify you of the pollution of disbelief. He obliged prayer to save you from pride, and zakah to purify you from stinginess. Imam Rida alayhi salatu wasalam said, have you granted anything for Allah today? He's talking to his servant. The servant gave a negative answer. The Imam said, so how should Allah recompense us? We think Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is supposed to give us everything, which He does, freely. And all He asks from us is a very, very small percentage of it. But we don't do that. Why? Because we feel like, oh, if I give to Allah,
I'll never get back.
I never get it back again. I will never get it back again. But it's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who gave it to you in the first place. So when you do that, you go into the next greater sin, or the next bad thing, and that is shortening the measure. Zakat is a measure. And when you refuse to pay the zakat, you're actually shortening the measure, which becomes a very, very, very dangerous thing. Allah tells us in the glorious Quran, woe to those that deal in fraud. When they measure against the people, they take full measure. But when they measure for them, for the people, or weigh for the people, they skimp for the people. Do those not think that when they do they not think that they will be raised up into a mighty day, a day when mankind shall stand before the Lord of all beings? No, indeed, the book of libertines is in the Sijin. And the Sijin is what?
Of hellfire, a place in the hellfire.
The Sijin is the place of the hellfire. So we take these things where when we do dealings with people, and here in America, what we find sometimes is that some of these companies that take money for Social Security and they build annuities and things like that, people trust them and they put their money into these things, and at the end of the term, when the people are supposed to pull a certain amount of money back out, they don't have that money. So what did these people do? They shorten the measure on these people. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is asking us through this verse in the Quran and through this chapter in the Quran that don't you know that there'll be a day when you'll be questioned about those things that you did? Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, one who shortens the measure in dealing with people will be taken to the bottom of the hellfire in the hereafter and placed between two fire mountains. He is then told to weigh the mountains, and he will do so forever. Wow. How do you weigh something that's constantly burning? The more they pile up, the more it consumes, and the more the weight changes. So imagine being there forever. We're told in the great book of Minhaj Siddiqeen that it gives the Tafseer of Mutaffifin. Our Prophet tells us that there are 5 consequences for 5 deeds. The people asked, O Messenger of Allah, what are they? He said, no people broke their promise, and Allah dominated their enemies on them. People that broke their promises, then Allah allowed those people's enemies to dominate them. He said, no people did adultery unless Allah spread death among them. Right now, one of the #1 killers of people in this country, and one of the #1 ways to have a very poor way of life, quality of life, comes from people doing what? People committing adultery and they're dying of AIDS. Or they're getting some type of sexually transmitted disease. Or they're destroying families because they wanted to commit adultery. We see that today. He says, no people lied and judged against Allah's rule unless they got increasingly unfortunate. And no people refrained from paying zakat unless they had no rain. And they didn't shorten the measure unless they got deprived of plants and entangled in famine. I mean, right now in this world today, are there places that are experiencing famine?
Yeah.
Are there places that experience drought? And as the world becomes smaller and smaller and smaller, then the responsibility for as Muslims becomes greater and greater and greater. Why? Because right now, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, we had to take somebody's word for it. Oh, the people are starving in Africa. We saw the pictures, but right now we can go on the internet and get real world proof of what's going on over there. We see all of these bad things, and we as Muslims, we have to pick up the banner, and we have to pick up the standard, and we have to be the leaders of today, and we have to show these people by example, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the glorious Quran that you are the greatest nation raised for the benefit of mankind, because we enjoin what is right and we forbid what is wrong. And if we begin to do those things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us to do, and if we stay away from these 9 sins that bring down adversities, then things will always be good for us. Again, those 9 things, and we'll say these 9 and then we'll close everything off. The first one is rebellion. The second one is violating people's rights. The third one is mocking Allah's servants. The fourth one is breaking promises. The fifth one is evident wrongdoing. The sixth one is scattering lies. The seventh one is judgment in contrast to Allah's rule. Number 8 is not paying zakah. And number 9 is shortening the measures.